My parents smiled and said, "You owe us for everything we've done," after secretly funneling my rent payments into my brother's house. I pushed the receipts across the table and said, "Your generosity doesn't get to spend my paycheck." The whole thing started as one of those family arrangements that feels normal right up until it does not. I was 34 at the time. I had just gone through a messy separation. My job had moved me to a mostly remote schedule, and I needed somewhere stable fast. My parents had a finished basement in their house, and they offered it to me for rent. Not free, never free. They were very clear about that. They told me it would be good for all of us. I would have a place to stay, they would have a little help with the bills, everybody would keep things simple. That sounded fine to me. At the time, I was tired enough to accept almost anything that did not involve another argument with my ex-wife or another round of sleeping on a coworker's couch. So I moved in. I brought my bed, my dresser, a laptop desk, and 2 suitcases full of clothes. I signed nothing because they told me we did not need to make it weird. That sentence should have warned me. I paid them $1,150 every month, always on the first. Sometimes a day early if the first landed on a weekend, and I remembered. I used bank transfer because that was easiest, and they liked it because it was clean and did not require cash or checks. My mom usually texted me the amount a few days before it was due, even though it never changed. At first, I thought that was just how she was, the kind of person who treated rent like a family chore instead of a financial agreement. My dad mostly stayed out of it. He was polite, practical, and emotionally absent in the way some older men can be when they have decided their only real job is to pay for things and avoid the feelings attached to paying for things. I did not love living there, but it was stable. The basement had its own bathroom. The internet was good. I was saving money. I was sleeping. For a while, that was enough. My brother Evan lived about 20 minutes away with his wife and their 2 kids. He had bought his house a year before I moved in. That fact mattered more than I understood at the time. My parents had helped him buy it. That was the family version, anyway. They had given him money for the down payment. They had co-signed something. They had covered closing costs. The details changed depending on which relative was telling the story and how bad the mood was that day. What never changed was the message that he needed the help more than I did. I was the stable one, the practical one, the one who did not need handouts because I had a decent job and no kids. That line always irritated me, but I let it go. I had learned early that pushing back in my family was like arguing with weather. You could do it, but it would not change anything and you would still end up soaked. So I paid my rent, kept my head down, and tried to rebuild my life. For the first few months, nothing seemed unusual. Then small things started to bother me. My mom would sometimes mention money problems in passing, not in a dramatic way, just enough to make me feel guilty. The water bill was high, the furnace had been acting up, the property tax payment was coming due. My dad's truck needed work. The basement had a damp spot by the wall that needed sealing. Every time she brought it up, I would tell her I understood and ask if she wanted me to cover anything extra that month. Most of the time she said no. Sometimes she would say not yet. Once or twice she said the family was making it work. That line made me feel like I was missing a joke I had not been invited to hear. Around the same time, I noticed my brother's house changing. He and his wife started replacing things. New fence, new appliances, new patio furniture, a better SUV in the driveway. I saw it all because my parents loved driving by his place on the way to the grocery store, and they liked to point out family progress as if it were proof that their sacrifices were producing results. I congratulated him when I saw him. He acted normal. A little smug, maybe, but nothing I could prove. He had always been the one who got the extra help and the extra patience. He had always been the one who could borrow money without being made to feel like a burden. I had spent most of my adult life trying not to resent that. I really had. I told myself it was just family dynamics and that comparing our situations did not help anybody. Then one night, my mom asked me to help her scan some insurance paperwork. She had a stack of folders on the kitchen table. She said her printer was acting up and she wanted the files saved to a USB drive. I was not in the mood, but I did it because helping with paperwork was easier than listening to her complain later that nobody helped around the house. I sat there in my work clothes while she moved around the kitchen making coffee and talking about random things that were supposed to sound casual. I opened one folder and saw a page with my name on it, not my full name on a legal document, just the way she had written my first name on a tab in blue ink. Under it was a list of months and amounts. My rent payments. Nothing shocking there, except next to several entries there were handwritten notes that made no sense to me at first. One note said partial transfer, another said mortgage hold, another said Jake backup. Jake was Evan. Nobody except my mom called him Jake. I remember just staring at the page for a second too long. I asked what it was. She barely looked over and said it was probably some old bookkeeping sheet that got mixed in. Then she took it away too fast. That should have been enough for me to dig. Instead, I told myself I was being nosy. I had grown up in a house where privacy was treated like an accusation. If you asked about something, that meant you were suspicious. If you were suspicious, you were being difficult. If you were being difficult, you were selfish. So I let it go, or I tried to. The paper kept bothering me. A week later, I checked my own bank transfers. I had a habit of downloading statements for budgeting. That habit probably saved me later. I looked at every rent payment I had sent since moving in. All of them went to my mom's personal account. Not a landlord account, not a property management company, her personal checking. I knew that already technically. What I had not really considered was how easy it would be for that money to disappear into anything she wanted. I started digging through older emails and text receipts, bank confirmations, memo lines, everything was there. Each payment had cleared the same day. Each payment had gone to the same account. And because I was the kind of person who gets uncomfortable when numbers do not line up, I made a spreadsheet. At first it was just because I was annoyed. Then it became because I was curious. Then it became because something felt wrong in a way I could not yet name. I added the dates. I added the amounts. I added the months. I also started checking my brother's house, not in a creepy way, just in a noticing way. I looked up county property records online. The house was in Evan and Claire's names. No parents, no family trust, no hidden co-owner, just them. I checked the mortgage lender because the internet has a way of letting you ask very specific questions without looking like a lunatic. That lender name matched a note I had seen on my mom's sheet. That was the first time my stomach really dropped. The second time happened when I found a recurring transfer pattern in my mom's account. I was not supposed to see it, obviously. But my dad had been in the hospital for a minor cardiac procedure, and my mom was overloaded and using me for errands. She gave me her laptop one afternoon and asked me to print some forms for the insurance company while she went to pick up prescriptions. Her email was open. I did not snoop right away. I really did not. I was trying to print the insurance form she had asked for. The print window lagged. A notification popped up. Then another. One of them was from the mortgage servicer for Evan's house. I saw the subject line and almost ignored it because I did not want to create drama out of a stray email. Then I noticed the amount. It matched the exact amount my rent had been for the previous 2 months. Not rounded, not close. Exact. That got my attention fast. I scrolled through the inbox just enough to see a chain of payment confirmations. My mom had been sending money from her account to Evan's mortgage servicer every month. Sometimes the same day my rent hit her account. Sometimes the next day. Sometimes she split it into 2 transfers and covered the rest with another deposit from somewhere I could not identify yet. I did not open anything private. I did not need to. The subject lines alone told me enough. My rent. My brother's house. Same numbers. Same months. The whole thing landed in my chest so hard that I had to sit down. I remember hearing the refrigerator hum and feeling like I had been dropped into a version of my own house where I had somehow missed the obvious signs for months. When my mom got back, I acted normal. That part took effort. I even printed the forms. I even put the laptop back where she left it. I even thanked her for letting me use it. She had no idea that I had already taken screenshots from my phone of the emails, or that I had started saving bank statements to a secure folder. I was angry, but I was not stupid. I also knew that if I went in hot, they would bury the truth under guilt and childhood history and old sacrifices, and the general family talent for making me feel rude whenever I asked for facts. So I kept my mouth shut. I spent the next 2 weeks collecting everything I could without making it obvious. I downloaded every statement from my own bank. I copied every rent transfer confirmation. I checked county records again. I pulled the mortgage company payment history through public-facing information and my own screenshots. I did not have a legal right to my parents' bank account details, so I stayed on the right side of that line. What I did have was enough. Enough to see the pattern. Enough to know that my rent was not being used for the house I was living in. Enough to see that it was being used to keep my brother's house afloat. Enough to know that nobody had planned to tell me. The part that made me feel stupid was how long they had probably been doing it. I went back through old messages from my mom, the little reminders she sent before the first of the month, the times she mentioned repairs, the times she said the household was stretched thin, the times she acted grateful when I covered an extra utility bill or bought groceries. Somewhere in that pile, it became clear that they had not been struggling for the house I lived in. They had been feeding his house with my money. I kept thinking there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe my parents had bought an investment property for him. Maybe there was a temporary bridge loan. Maybe they were helping him with a bad month and would catch me up later. I wanted there to be a version of this where they had not lied to me. That was the most embarrassing part. I was still trying to protect them from my own reaction. Then I found the note that destroyed that hope. It was in a folder labeled taxes. a simple yellow sheet with handwritten bullet points and dates. My mother had listed my rent payments on one side. On the other side, she had listed the exact mortgage amount for Evan's house. Under that, in smaller writing, she had added extra for lawn care, HOA dues, and insurance. It was not a one-off. It was a plan, a system, a monthly funnel. I sat in my room with that sheet in my hands and felt something in me go very cold. Not rage, not yet, just clarity. I had been treating this like a misunderstanding. It was not. It was deliberate, maybe not malicious in the way a movie villain is malicious, but deliberate enough to count. I still did not confront them right away. I wanted to know how far it went, so I kept digging. I found a second spreadsheet in a shared folder on the family computer. That one was worse. It had columns for every month going back almost 2 years. There were initials, mine, Evan's, my parents'. There were notes about who had paid what and when. There were lines that said rent received from me and mortgage applied to Jake House. There were reminders about not discussing the arrangement in front of me. There were notes about telling me the money was for household expenses because he would not react well if he knew. That sentence hit me harder than the rest, not because I was surprised, because I realized my own parents had been keeping a secret from me for so long that they were documenting their lies like they were managing a bookkeeping error. I did not sleep much that night. I kept replaying the last couple of years. Every time my mom had thanked me for being responsible. Every time my dad had nodded at me like I was the reliable son. Every time Evan had accepted help with that same lazy confidence he always carried. I thought about all the times I had skipped buying something for myself because I was saving. I thought about the months I had driven an older car because I wanted to get my own emergency fund back up. I thought about the nights I had eaten cheap food and told myself this was temporary, all while my rent was quietly propping up my brother's house. Not my household, not my lease, my brother's house. The next morning, my mom asked me if I could cover the electric bill because it had gone up. I remember looking at her over the kitchen table and feeling almost calm. That scared me a little. I said I would think about it. She smiled in that relieved way she used when she thought I had folded. I did not correct her. Instead, I called my bank during my lunch break and asked for a full set of statements going back to when I moved in. That was not suspicious because I was the account holder and they gave them to me without drama. I then called a cousin who worked in accounting and asked a few careful questions without telling the whole story. She told me to keep everything. That was the first useful advice anybody had given me. Then I called a lawyer, not because I wanted to sue my parents immediately. I wanted to know what my rights were. I was nervous the whole time because calling a lawyer about your own family makes you feel like a traitor even when your family started it. The lawyer was a calm guy who had probably heard every kind of family mess imaginable. He told me the key thing was documentation. He said if I had proof of payments and proof the money had been used for something other than what they represented, I should stop sending extra money and preserve every record. He said depending on the exact wording and whether there had been any written promises, there might be more to explore. He also told me not to argue about memories. He said memories were slippery. Paper was not. That sentence stayed with me. Paper was not. I started building my own folder. Rent confirmations, screenshots, emails, photos of the handwritten notes I had taken when I found the tax folder, public property records from the county site, the mortgage lender name, a timeline. I even included a note about the hospital procedure because that explained why I had access to the laptop and why they had been distracted enough to let me see things. Once I had that, I felt weirdly steadier. Not happy, just steadier. The facts were ugly, but facts are at least solid. I decided I would not confront them until I was ready to leave. That was important. I did not want to get trapped in a conversation where I was still paying rent while they explained why their lying was actually a form of love. So I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. It was not glamorous. The place was older, the carpet was ugly, and the kitchen had one drawer that stuck. But it was mine. I started moving a few boxes at a time so nobody would panic. I also kept paying rent to my parents for 1 more month because I did not want them to have a sudden reason to snoop through my room before I was out. That last month felt like swallowing sand, but I did it for strategy, not forgiveness. Then came the family dinner. I knew it was coming because my mom had asked everyone to come by on a Sunday. Evan and Claire were there. My dad was in a better mood than usual because he had finally gotten past his hospital follow-up and thought the worst of it was behind him. My mom had made too much food, which was her way of trying to create a nice mood before bringing up money. I had spent the whole afternoon in my apartment packing the last of my things and making sure the folder with my paperwork was in my car. I did not bring it in with me at first. I wanted to see how they acted. The meal was normal on the surface, too normal. That was how I knew something was coming. My mom kept asking about work. My dad talked about a neighbor's roof repair. Claire mentioned a school fundraiser. Evan was quiet in the way people get quiet when they are waiting for someone else to handle the uncomfortable part. Then my mom started talking about how expensive everything had gotten. Groceries, gas, insurance, the house. She mentioned that family had to stick together. My dad added that the world was not getting any cheaper. Evan nodded. I could feel where it was going before it landed. My mom said they needed to talk about contributions for the next few months, not directly, of course. She dressed it up as stability, as support, as helping everyone through a hard stretch. I asked what she meant. She said the bills had gone up and that since I was doing better financially now, it made sense for me to help more. My brother did not look at me. That was the moment I knew he was not surprised by any of this. Maybe he did not know every detail. Maybe he knew enough. Either way, he was comfortable letting my parents do the dirty part. I asked how much more she wanted. She gave me a number that was higher than my current rent and said it would only be temporary. I kept my face neutral. I asked what exactly the money would be covering. She said the household, that word again, the same vague word people use when they want money to sound like care. I nodded slowly and said I would get something from my car. Nobody objected. I came back inside with a folder. I placed it on the table without drama, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a folder and a set of copied documents. I slid the first receipt across to my mother, then the next, then the bank statements, then the screenshots, then the county records, then the page with her handwritten notes. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I told them I had paid rent every month on time. I told them I had kept records because I was not stupid. I told them I had found their own notes. I told them I knew exactly where the money had gone. I watched my mother's face change first, not into guilt, into calculation. That was the worst part. She was not shocked. She was trying to figure out how much I knew and how to answer it. My father looked confused for a few seconds, then angry, then tired. Evan finally looked at the papers, and his expression hardened in a way that told me he had probably known there was a paper trail but had assumed I would never find it. I let them look. I gave them time. That mattered. People reveal more when they think they still have room to spin. My mom started explaining before I asked her anything. The story she tried to build was that the money had always been family money, that I had been helping the family house, and that the family had decided to redirect some support temporarily because Evan's mortgage had gotten tight. She made it sound like they had been doing me a favor by keeping me in the dark. My father jumped in with the old line that family helps family and that I had never lacked for anything important growing up. That one annoyed me so much I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was so familiar. It was the same moral argument they always reached for whenever the math was ugly. I asked them what lease I had signed that authorized my rent to be used for my brother's mortgage. Silence. I asked them whether they had ever told me directly that my payments were subsidizing his house. More silence. I asked why they had written not to discuss the arrangement in front of me. That note came out of the folder and landed in the middle of the table like a dead bird. My mom said it was just to avoid stress. I asked if that was before or after they decided to keep taking my money while making me feel like I was contributing to the house I lived in. She said I was being dramatic. I remember that clearly because it was the first time in the whole conversation that I felt real anger. Not enough to explode, just enough to go very still. I told her I was not dramatic. I told her I was precise. I told her there was a difference. Then I pushed the receipts a little farther toward the center of the table and told them their generosity did not get to spend my paycheck. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Even Evan looked uncomfortable then, which surprised me a little. He had the decency to at least look uncomfortable. My mother asked whether I was accusing her of stealing. I said I was accusing her of lying. That distinction mattered to me. I was not interested in turning the family dinner into a criminal trial if I did not have to. I wanted the truth to stand on its own. My father said they had paid for things for me over the years. Braces, school clothes, part of my first car, a few semesters of community college before I got scholarships. He said I had no right to act like I had been abandoned. That was the moment the old guilt tried to creep back in. Because he was not wrong about those things. They had paid for a lot. I would have been dishonest if I pretended otherwise. But paying for a child is not the same thing as taking a grown man's rent and secretly directing it into another adult son's mortgage. So I told him that. I told him I had never denied that they had helped me. I told him help did not turn into ownership. I told him a parent does not get to invoice a child forever just because the child once needed braces. My mom started crying then, which was exactly what she always did when she hit a wall she could not bluff through. The tears were real. That is important to say. I do not think she was faking them. I think she really believed she had been reasonable. That may be the most frightening part of all. People can hurt you sincerely. She said Evan had been under pressure. She said the kids needed stability. She said the market had been bad for him. She said I had a decent job and no dependents. There it was again. The same old ranking system. The one where my life was always considered elastic because it did not have a spouse or children in the frame at that exact moment. I told her my finances were not their emergency fund. I told her if Evan could not afford the house, then they should have helped him directly from their own accounts instead of funneling my rent into his mortgage while pretending I was paying for the basement I lived in. My brother finally spoke in the only way he could, which was to say I was making this sound more sinister than it was. He said they had only been bridging a gap. He said things had been hard for everybody. He said he had thought I understood. That was the closest he got to admitting anything. I asked what exactly I was supposed to have understood, that my rent was not rent, that I was paying a family tax to keep his house afloat, that nobody had the courage to say it to my face because they knew I would say no. He did not answer. He did not need to. His silence was answer enough. I put the folder back together and told them I had already signed a lease elsewhere. I told them I would be out within the week. I told them the final month's payment had already been sent, and that after that they would not receive another cent from me unless there was a written agreement and a real explanation. My mother looked horrified at the idea of me leaving, not because she wanted me there for me, because she had already lost access to the money and the labor and the convenience. That was when I understood how much of my role in the house had been invisible. I was not just a son. I was a financial buffer, a polite emergency cushion, a person they could point to when they needed proof that the family was still functioning. My dad said I was overreacting. He said I was walking away from my own family over money. I told him no. I was walking away because they had made money into the truth and truth into an inconvenience. Nobody had a good answer for that. The rest of dinner was a blur. Nobody really ate. Claire kept her eyes on the table. Evan got defensive in the way people do when they have been caught benefiting from something they never had to examine too closely. My mom cried again. My father got stiff and quiet. I picked up my folder and left while the food went cold. I drove back to my apartment and sat in the car for a long time before I went inside. I remember feeling weirdly empty, not triumphant, not crushed, just done. The next few days were all logistics. I moved my stuff out. I changed my direct deposit. I canceled the auto pay to my parents. I sent a polite text telling them my final payment had been made and that any future communication about money needed to be in writing. That was the first time I made the situation official. My mom called anyway. I did not answer. My dad left a voicemail that was mostly frustration and disappointment wrapped in the language of concern. I saved it. My brother sent a long message about how I had humiliated the family. I saved that too, not because I was looking for revenge, because I had finally learned that every one of them was capable of rewriting reality the moment they felt cornered. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer. He had reviewed the documents I sent and told me I had enough to establish a pattern of misrepresentation. He said that in plain English, what I had been paying did not align with what they had represented it as, and there might be a claim if I wanted to pursue reimbursement or at least formal accounting for the period in question. He also said the money might be harder to recover than the principal. I appreciated that he said it that way, no false hope, just the truth. I told him I wanted one thing first, a demand letter, something clean and professional, something that laid out the timeline, the payments, the discrepancy, and the request for an accounting and reimbursement of the amount redirected to my brother's mortgage. He drafted it. I paid the retainer. That hit me hard too because now I was paying to untangle a mess that had been created with my own rent money. But I wanted the paper trail to be solid. The letter went out by certified mail. My mother called me twice after it arrived. I let it go to voicemail both times. Then she sent a series of texts that were basically a public relations campaign in miniature. She said I was turning family business into legal business. She said I was embarrassing them. She said I was forcing them to defend themselves when all they had ever done was try to help. I did not respond. A few days later, my dad left a different kind of voicemail. He sounded older, not kinder, just older. He said they had never meant to hurt me. He said they were trying to keep the family stable. He said they had thought I would understand once things settled down. That was the most honest thing any of them had said so far. They really had thought I would accept it. That I would grumble, maybe, but keep paying. That I would see their explanation as enough because they had always trained me to accept the explanation after the fact, even when the damage was already done. I did not call back. I focused on moving. The new apartment was small, but it felt enormous because nobody was monitoring my bank account there. I bought a cheap dining table secondhand. I assembled it myself. I put my paperwork in a locked drawer. I started cooking again because I could not stand the idea of another week of takeout. I also started sleeping better. That part surprised me. I had not realized how much tension had been living in my shoulders until it was gone. A month after I moved out, my lawyer heard back from my parents through a different attorney they had hired. That was the moment I knew the threat had finally registered. Their attorney did not admit wrongdoing outright, but he did not deny the payment history either. He asked for copies of everything I had. I sent a sanitized packet through my lawyer. Then we waited. The settlement talks were not dramatic. There were no shouting matches. That was probably the healthiest part of the whole mess. Everything stayed in writing. The family magic trick stopped working the moment paper entered the room. They eventually agreed to reimburse part of what had been redirected over the previous 18 months. Not all of it. That irritated me. But enough. Enough that I could replace the money I had burned trying to keep a fake peace. Enough that I could build my emergency fund back up. Enough that the principle mattered. More importantly, the agreement included a written acknowledgement that the payments had been used for Evan's mortgage and household obligations, not for the housing arrangement I had been told they covered. That acknowledgement felt better than the money. It did not erase what happened, but it forced the truth into a form they could not casually rewrite later. My brother was furious about that part. He said it made the family look bad. That was probably the most revealing thing he had ever said. Not that we had done something wrong, that it looked bad. That was his threshold, how things appeared, not what they were. My mom stopped talking to me for a while. My dad sent occasional neutral texts about holidays and weather. I kept the messages short and bland. I was not interested in a dramatic cutoff. I just wanted distance. Claire eventually reached out privately. She did not defend the whole situation, which I appreciated. She mostly said she had not known how deep it went. I believed her, at least enough. She told me Evan had been under a lot of pressure and had let my parents manage things because it was easier than fighting with them. That sounded exactly like the kind of cowardly convenience that lets bad family systems survive for years. I told her I was sorry she had been dragged into it. I meant that. A few months later, I heard through a cousin that my parents had stopped covering the mortgage on Evan's house. That had not been part of the repayment agreement. They just could not keep doing it. Apparently, once my money was gone and my lawyer had forced the issue, the whole arrangement started to wobble. Evan had to refinance. He complained to everybody who would listen. He said I had made things worse. That was almost funny to me. I had simply stopped funding a lie. The lie had done the rest. My parents downsized eventually, not because I forced them to, because the math finally arrived and sat at the table with them. That is the thing about hiding money problems inside family obligation. It always works until it does not. Then it collapses all at once and everyone acts surprised. I was not surprised. I was relieved, not because I wanted them to suffer. I did not. I just wanted them to deal with their own finances without using me as a buffer. The weirdest part is that I still think about that dinner sometimes. Not because it was the angriest moment of my life. It was not. It was the clearest. I remember the way my mother's face changed when she realized I had the paperwork. I remember my father going quiet because the old authority in his voice no longer had anywhere to land. I remember my brother looking offended that I had made him answer for something he had happily benefited from. And I remember how calm I was, not because I was above it, because I had finally done the work before the argument. That made all the difference. I had the statements. I had the screenshots. I had the county records. I had the timeline. I had the pattern. Without that, they could have turned the whole thing into an emotional argument about respect and gratitude and the hardships of raising children. With it, they had to sit there and watch the truth sit on the table between us. That was the first time in my life I realized calm is not the same as weakness. Sometimes calm is just what happens when you are finally prepared. I am not close with them now. I am not bitter either. Those are not the same thing. I can say this honestly. I understand why they did it. That does not mean I forgive it. There is a difference between explaining a choice and excusing one. My parents chose to spend my rent on my brother's house because it was easier than asking him to solve his own problem and easier than admitting to me what they were doing. They counted on my silence. They counted on guilt. They counted on me being the dependable son who would keep paying and not ask for the map. They were wrong. I am in a better place now. I have my own apartment. I have a real lease. I have my own accounts. I check my statements every month not because I am obsessive, but because I learned what happens when you stop watching your own money. I also learned that family can use the language of sacrifice while treating you like an asset. That lesson cost me more than I wish it had. It also gave me something back. I do not confuse loyalty with blind payment anymore. If somebody wants my help, they have to ask for it honestly. If they want my money, they have to explain where it goes. And if they ever smile at me again and tell me I owe them for everything they have done, I know exactly what to do. I will ask for the receipts, because now I know what happens when the numbers speak for themselves.